In these next few videos, we're going to be looking at the biopsychosocial model and how this can be used to explain the factors that might contribute to people developing specific phobias. We will also be using this model as outlined on page 560 of your textbooks, figure 14.2, to look at how we can use these different perspectives to manage phobia and the symptoms that come with phobia disorder. When we're looking at the biological factors, we'll be looking at the role of stress, so how the flight-fight response and the HPA axis activation might contribute to phobias, as well as how dysfunctional GABA systems might contribute. When looking at social factors, we'll be looking at environmental triggers, parental modeling, transmission of threat information, and how these different factors might contribute to the development of phobias. When looking at psychological factors, we'll be looking at the psychodynamic, behavioral, and cognitive models to explain it. We'll also be using the biopsychosocial model to explain and work out how we can manage these different symptoms that might occur when people have phobia and how we can decrease and desensitize people from those phobias. Specifically with biological factors, we'll be looking at the use of benzos, GABA supplements, and the relaxation response in order to do this. In terms of social factors, we'll be looking at non-fear modeling and gathering accurate information and facts. And in terms of psychological factors, we'll be revisiting our theories of learning, specifically classical conditioning, and look at CBT, systematic desensitization, and flooding as different ways of managing the symptoms of phobia. In this video, however, we'll be focusing on the biological perspective. In class, we'll be looking more in detail at the role of genetics and the role of stress response in contributing to development of specific phobia disorder. But in this lesson, we'll be focusing on the neurotransmitter GABA. GABA stands for gamma-aminobutyric acid. And GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter that makes postsynaptic neurons less likely to fire. So inhibitory there comes from the word inhibit, which you might have heard in other contexts meaning to stop or to prevent. So this specific type of neurotransmitter makes neurons less likely to fire. GABA also has the role of fine-tuning neurotransmitters in our brain and maintaining neurotransmission at an optimum level. GABA acts as a counterbalance between the effects of glutamate, which is an excitatory neurotransmitter, and it actually prevents the brain from going into seizures. So there are two types of neurotransmitters that we can see there. Inhibitory neurotransmitters, such as GABA, which make neurons less likely to fire. And on the other hand, glutamate, which is an example of an excitatory. So excitatory means it is making it work more and makes neurons more likely to fire. We need to have a balance of these two different types of neurotransmitters, both inhibitory and excitatory, for normal functioning. Scientists have developed certain drugs that actually stimulate neurotransmitters in the same way as these natural neurotransmitters in our brain do. Inhibitory drugs are called agonists, and the other way around. So excitatory drugs that stimulate neurotransmitters are called agonists, and drugs that inhibit, so drugs that mimic the effects of GABA, are called antagonists. Studies have also found that people who have low levels of GABA and high levels of glutamate might be more anxious. So there are less neurotransmitters there stopping the neurons from firing, and an imbalance of this GABA and glutamate makes these neurons more likely to fire, and hence these people might be more anxious. Scientists have developed those specific drugs that can mimic GABA and hence help people with this anxiety response. So people who have specific fears, such as the fear of flying, can take drugs that contain GABA to feel more relaxed and to actually increase these inhibitory transmitters in their brain. When we're thinking about this GABA-glutamate balance, there are two useful analogies. If you want to take a look at page 568, figure 14.5, one way of thinking about this balance is looking at a traffic light. So when you're looking at a traffic light, the red light, which stops things from going, is GABA, so that's an inhibitory drug, and glutamate is like the green light, which makes things go, so it is an excitatory drug. We need to have a balance of this glutamate and GABA for normal daily functioning, but in everyday life, certain drugs that we take will actually either increase or decrease the levels of glutamate that's in our brains. As you can see in figure 14.5, it says here that caffeine increases glutamate activity. That is why it makes us more alert, because it's increasing the level of excitatory neurotransmitters in our brain, whereas alcohol, on the other hand, decreases glutamate activity. In terms of GABA, benzos increase GABA activity, and you can read more about benzos in box 14.4. Alcohol increases GABA activity, whereas caffeine has the opposite effect and it inhibits GABA release.